All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Peaks here, admin of the Killer Angels tonight, talking to educator Christopher Stevenson, reenactor of the War of 1812, although we allow him in our American Civil War group.
I do the Civil War as well.
He knows a little bit about muskets. He is our small arms expert of the group, actually, and taught me a lot, things that I didn't know, and interesting facts, and quite knowledgeable. I think everybody will enjoy this right here. As we all know, there was a big change that happened between the Mexican-American War and the U.S. Civil War. Chris, would you mind explaining the difference between the muskets that they used in Mexico as opposed to the U.S. Civil War? What kind of changes that made them so much more deadly and better from long distance?
So, fundamentally, every military musket up until really 1850s can be traced back to the brown bess. This is an Indian reproduction, so it doesn't look great, but it gets the idea. Yeah, the brown bess. So the brown bess is the British infantry pattern. It's pretty simple construction, uses a flint action system, and it's a smoothbore muzzle. So essentially what happens is you ram the ball home. Anything smaller than the barrel is going to fire. Usually load a few calibers below the actual bore.
So explain to them real quick when you get through what exactly a smoothbore is.
Oh, so a smoothbore has no rifling. So this is just a tube. It's just a pipe.
Okay.
And what that means is there's no spin on the ball. Now, smooth bores have some advantages. They're easier to clean, easier to load. Disadvantage is their fire is erratic. So when you pull the trigger, the ball is going to bounce around inside of the tube and go out whatever direction it feels like. On a good day, with no wind, an expert shot might be able to hit a barnyard door at 80 yards, one of these things. Maybe.
80?
80 yards. If they're lucky, and if they're a damn good shot. That's a barnyard door, mind you. However, a rifle would require the ball to be fitted perfectly to the rifling, precisely. And what that meant was that every time you fired the gun, it fouls. See, black powder is a disgusting, beautiful substance. It produces, I think it's offhand a 1 to 26 volume yield. So when black powder is activated, it leaves 26 times as much residue as its pre-activation load, which is more than any other substance on Earth. So what that means is every time you fire that thing, it's leaving a lot of soot behind. So after 5 or 10 rounds, your barrel is caked in this post-firing powder. And what that means is the ball is harder and harder to ram home, unless the ball is smaller than the barrel. Now, if you're firing a rifle, the ball has to be perfectly fitted to the barrel. Otherwise, it will not grip the rifling and it will not spin. Spin creates a drilling effect, and in Newtonian physics, that basically compensates for drag. So as you shoot, if you're drilling through the air, you're compensating for drag, and that means you have greater accuracy. If it's a smoothbore round and it's bouncing around back and forth and it's not spinning, it's not drilling, which means the effect of the air, the effect of drag is pulling it backwards and forwards and totally inaccurate. But
so the rifling is grooves, and those just the grooves and the spinning is what made the rifle go, that much further.
Yes.
As far as this, so I've never really sat there and delved into the that it was the spinning of the bullet that caused it to have so much more distance. That's interesting fact there that I'm sure a lot of people didn't know.
Well, what's truly interesting is there's a recent science. I don't really follow modern military innovations that much, but a recent concept of a spiraled shell, and this has been experimented with solid slug shotguns, where the ball is actually cut to spin itself, which means you could fire out of a smoothbore and achieve the same spin, which is why the U.S. military is actually experimenting with going back to smoothbore tanks firing spiraled shells, which is really interesting. But all
that's
you need is you just need the ball to spin. That's it. Rifling is the easiest way to do so conventionally. But it's not worth it if you have to fit the ball to it. You have to ram the big boy home. I don't know how much I can swear on this channel. But if you got to ram it home, it's much more challenging because it has to fit it perfectly. Whereas a smoothbore round, it can be off a few calibers. That's fine. So smoothbores load faster, rifles load slower. And you have to ask how much you want to exchange accuracy for speed. And most conventional armies chose speed. So rifles were initially not issued at all. During the American Revolution, various sharpshooter units used hunting rifles instead of muskets and were deployed as pseudo-skirmishers. As time went on, the Europeans realized this had value, and so various military forces began to adopt Jaeger rifle units and issue them rifles instead of muskets. And with the understanding that they would fire slower but more effectively. So you might deploy a company of rifles off to the left and move in your regiments. Your mainline fusilier would still use a smoothbore. Fires quickly, effectively, and fix a bayonet in the top, and you have a shooting spear, which is basically what you want. With riflemen teasing along the flanks. When we get to Mexico, we're still using this. The flintlock system is pretty straightforward.
Sorry to interrupt you. When but you said about when did the rifling take place? When you said you have the rifleman on the end, when did they start that?
Rifling?
Yeah, you just said the rifling on for I'm sorry for the people out there who don't know. I'm just
the Chinese discovered rifling in the 16th century. The problem is adapting it to military application. What do you want? One shot fired every 2 minutes accurately, or 4 or 5 shots fired every 2 minutes without accuracy? I'll take the latter.
Gotcha.
So it existed. It just had no military application. Until eventually military theorists realized you could have a small number of riflemen on the flanks teasing the enemy, as long as your main line used what were basically shooting spears. Because that's what this is. This is a shooting spear. You pop your bayonet in the top. It's just a phalanx that fires. That's it. So the function is pretty simple. Pour the powder, pushing the ball, ram the ball home, and you also prime the pan. You prime the pan first. When you lock it down with the steel. And the process is quite simple from that point. At that point, it's just physics. When you pull the trigger, it releases the mainspring, so the flint will strike the steel, and that will create a spark. And that spark will activate the powder inside of the pan, which will then travel through a small hole inside of the barrel, activating the powder beneath the ball. That fires, and you've got your shot.
Right.
It's imperfect. A perfectly maintained flintlock musket will misfire at least 1 in every 10 shots. 20% misfires if you're fighting in an area with high humidity.
Okay. All right, so back to the Mexican-American War.
They use these.
Okay, and from what I've read, the American muskets were superior to the Mexican Army's muskets. Is that true?
No, it's not. So, theoretically, the Americans should have carried this beautiful boy into battle. Too many muskets. They should have been carrying this into battle. This is a Springfield model 1842. Phenomenal musket. One of my favorites. And this is a percussion lock. Percussion lock is vastly superior because you don't have to worry about flints. You simply open the hammer, place a cap on the cone, and fire. It's like a cap gun.
Except like a cap gun.
Bullets. This is a phenomenally better weapon. The thing is, you need to have caps to shoot it. America had thousands of these guns by the Mexican War. What they didn't have were the caps. I find it definitely hilarious. The War Department even wrote, where caps are lacking, flints will do. So even though the Americans should have gone to war with this gun, because this is superior, this is, unlike the flintlock, this is entirely reliable. It's a beautiful musket. They should have gone to war with this, but they didn't because they didn't have the caps. Logistics is what defines war. And so they went to war with the Model 1840 Springfield, which used a flint system.
What caliber round did those weapons?
Brown Bess or Springfield?
Either one.
Well, they're different. The Brown Bess fired a 75 caliber bore, which meant that it fired 75 caliber, so it fired a 69 caliber round.
Wow.
The Springfield had a 69 caliber, meaning it fired a 66 caliber round. So a Springfield would fire this. This is a musket ball from the Confederates at the Battle of Antietam. Sorry, Gettysburg.
It's like actually some damage there.
Gettysburg. Oh, we know they're vicious. So this is what they would have marched in. If they had carried these, yes, they would have had a superior musket to the Mexicans. But the Mexicans were carrying the Brown Bess that I was just holding. The Americans were carrying the Model 1840 Springfield, which is this with a flintlock. However, the small subset of Americans were carrying something a little different. Yeah, there we are. Sorry, a lot of props here. Yep. Some Americans were carrying this. I'm sure you recognize it.
Oh, yeah.
You remember what this gun's called, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's it called?
Huh?
This one. What's it called?
You gonna use? Oh, I'm sorry. What was that? I'm sorry. I totally missed your question. I thought you said.
I asked if you knew what this gun was.
Oh no. I'm sorry. No, I didn't understand that. You asked if I knew what that gun was. Let me see it again.
There we go.
No, I cannot tell what that gun is.
So this is a Model 1841 U.S. rifle. And in the 1840s, the U.S. government was sort of debating about what kind of gun they wanted to adopt. A portion of the Ordnance Department wanted to go with rifles. A lot of them wanted to go with smoothbores. They all agreed on percussion. So eventually a compromise was struck. The Model 1842 Springfield would be a smoothbore. However, it would have a sufficiently thick enough barrel that it could be rifled at some point in the later date. And would be percussion lock. But in order to provide some kind of rifle, a separate Jaeger-style American rifle, the Model 1841 U.S. rifle, would be designed to serve as a rifle for rifle companies. And like the 42, it's a percussion lock. However, it was chambered in 54 rather than 69, and it is rifled. Now, when the Mexican War came, General Winfield Scott, Major General commanding U.S. forces, the Veracruz campaign, was opposed to the use of the rifle. He wanted to stick with the smoothbore musket. However, a senator from Mississippi, who had used his political connections to achieve a colonelcy, disagreed.
Was that man's name Jefferson?
His name is Jefferson Davis. And he wanted his Mississippi boys armed with a rifle. And he managed to use his connections to get right to Polk. And President Polk, James K. Polk, the awful president, awarded Davis the the Model 1841 U.S. rifle. His special rifle battalion was armed with them. And, what battle was it? What's the Million de Rey? I remember.
What battle? I know a good bit of Buena Vista,
Buena Vista. Thank you. I think it was Buena Vista. His rifle battalion held off a much larger Mexican force, in part due to its superior accuracy and range. And so the Model 1841 U.S. rifle became known as the Mississippi rifle, which led to a common misconception where people think this was a Confederate weapon. It was not a Confederate weapon. Both sides used this gun equally. It's simply a rifle.
Okay, so one question I got for you. The round, of course, we all know this about Civil War, but what when you tell me the different calibers, what was the
Different calibers
difference?
right?
Well, yeah, what was what kind of damage would those do as opposed to the MiniAball?
I mean, none of them are very good. Uh,
I guess
I
maybe
mean,
it's because it wasn't the casualties, but I just don't hear about the massive amputations and I know there wasn't that many men involved, so naturally there's not going to be as many casualties. But it just seemed like the damage didn't seem severe, or maybe that's just something I have not been taught.
soft lead is soft lead. When soft lead enters the body, it begins to flatten. So it increases the surface area. By the time it exits the body, it is much wider than its entry. When that soft lead strikes bone, it does not punch through it, it cracks it, it splinters it, which requires amputation. There is a reason why the Geneva Convention banned the use of lead bullets. They have to be jacketed. It's an awful system. And it doesn't matter if the ball was 52, 54, 58, or 69.
So really, essentially, between the rounds in the American Civil War, the Mexican War, and the American Civil War, they still inflicted the same amount of damage.
What do you mean by damage?
Well, all right. So in school, we're taught in philosophy that the advent of the MiniAball and the rifling changed the war, and then rifling had actually been taking place before the war, and the rounds that was used in the Mexican American War was just as deadly and damaging to the body as what the MiniAball was.
Very much so, yes.
But the way it's taught is the rifling and the MiniAball was the ones that changed it. But really, it was there all along, correct? It just hadn't been employed.
Exactly.
Okay. Good. Thank you for that history lesson, because a lot of people probably would not known that.
The rifle's efficacy tends to be exaggerated. Earl J. Hess wrote a phenomenal book on this called The Myth of the Rifle. The rifle is more accurate, yes. But accuracy on a gun range is not the same as accuracy in a battlefield.
Absolutely.
I mean, you know this better than most. When its situation is chaotic and you can't see a goddamn thing, aiming
and
is
also,
useless.
it's different between shooting at a target and a person.
There's a fellow, Leander Sitwell. He was in the 61st Illinois, as memory serves. His memoirs are wonderful to read. I highly recommend it. And he was at the Battle of Shiloh. That was his first engagement. And he was actually quite close to the Hornet's Nest. Bad timing, bad place. And he tells the story of how his regiment, with Model 1861 Springfields, were engaged by the Confederates. And he remembered as a child that he and his compatriots would go squirrel hunting. But to purchase the ammunition for the squirrel hunting, they'd have to find and roast nutmegs. So it took a long time to get enough money for a few rounds. So missing your shot was unacceptable. You had to strike in the head. So when he gets to the Battle of Shiloh, there he is, not this musket, ready to go, aimed, and he's just sitting there and he's waiting. And he's waiting and he's waiting and he's waiting. Because the Confederates are firing at him, but he can't see them. Not through the white smoke. He doesn't want to shoot. Because the idea of firing at a target you can't see is ridiculous. And so he sits there. And both sides are exchanging back and forth, and he does nothing. Until finally his lieutenant shouted, "For Christ's sake, Leander, what the hell are you doing? Shoot!" And he said, "At that point I realized, you didn't aim, you just shot. And I never aimed my gun at a man again." So it doesn't matter how accurate your rifle is if you're not aiming. And how do you aim if you can't see your opponent and you're panicking and it's chaos? Except for a couple of well-timed volleys, most Civil War engagements is just blind against the blind.
Good. house there. Mentioned earlier, you said about hitting 80 yards, hitting a barn door. The Civil War, how accurate distance could it hit something?
Well, if you're armed with a smoothbore, not at all. But if you got
I'm sorry,
a
what
rifle,
now?
if you're armed with a smoothbore,
Yeah.
but
I'm sorry.
if you've got a rifle, it's a lot more accurate in theory. So this is a marvel of nature. This is the Burton modification of the MiniAball.
Ooh, Lord.
This is from Gettysburg. By the way, if you're curious, this is the god awful 69 caliber version. Jesus Christ, fucking war crime to shoot this. I'll tell you.
That is a 6.69.
69 caliber Confederate manufacture.
God.
I collect bullets. Anyway,
I'm surprised it didn't take a whole arm off by just getting shot with that.
You would. Take your arm off shooting it too, let me tell you. I've got a 69 caliber rifle over there. Trust me.
So that kind of hit.
You lose an arm on either side. So the MiniAball was a brilliant design, only briefly ever actually used. The original Mini-A was actually had a wooden plug in the back, and the wood would expand upon being fired. I'll skip all the boring details, but essentially Burton in the U.S. Totally redefined the bullet. The purpose of this bullet is to expand when fired. When this bullet is loaded, its diameter is 5.75 caliber. Now those grooves along the side, hopefully it can be seen, those are for lubrication. But what's most important is the concavity at the bottom. When this ball is loaded, now this is a 58 caliber. This is a 58 caliber rifle I'm holding right now. See how easily that fits? No problem.
Wow.
With a bit of lubrication, and this is an original rifle ball in a reproduction musket. It fits like a glove. With a bit of lubrication, this ball will slide right down, no problem. When it's fired, the explosion of gas from the black powder will strike the concavity, causing a rapid expansion of mass. That will mean that the rim will quickly expand from 5.75 to within reasonable tolerances, whatever the barrel is, easily to 5.8 or 5.77. Once it expands, it's gripping the rifling, which means it's spinning properly. This solves the fundamental problem of rifles. You used to have to ram a ball home, which fit the bore exactly, which was an extremely laborious and exceptionally inefficient process. Now you could load a ball smaller than the bore, like a smooth bore, but when you fired it, the ball could grip the musketry. And the precise reason was because it was no longer a ball at all. It was a conical, concave-based bullet. And that allowed a rifleman to load their rifle as quickly as a smoothbore, but discharge it as easily as a smoothbore, with all the effects of rifling.
That's very interesting. I didn't know that.
So there was no reason functionally not to arm someone with a rifle, except unless you like some god awful thing called buck and ball.
Bucket ball.
Buck and ball. Buck and ball is a monstrosity. Buck and ball was a 66 caliber round ball with 3 30 to 31 caliber balls on top. Basically a long range shotgun. And by 1863, it was largely abandoned, but at extremely close range, it was actually more devastating than a MiniAball because you could hit multiple targets. The Irish Brigade and the 6th New Jersey were both big fans of it. By 1864, the Irish Brigade had been forced to relinquish their smoothbores. Yep. Mysteriously, right up until Appomattox, their quartermasters kept requesting a couple of buck and ball rounds every order, which would indicate that a few men were still carrying them. I suspect probably using them like shotguns in World War I as trench sweepers.
That's a pretty interesting story there.
Gotta love that. At the Battle of Gettysburg, the 6th New Jersey, they didn't even bother with the ball. They kept tearing open their cartridges, collecting all the 30 caliber shots, and just loading them all together and firing them like shotguns.
How many different types of rifles were made? I mean, during the war. I mean, there's probably a bunch. I mean, ballpark. I mean, how many? I mean, different manufacturers produced one of them.
I couldn't tell you.
I imagine, yeah, it'd probably be a hard number off the top of your head. I've seen pictures of the ones that, just seemed like there was just hundreds of them, different types.
It's fascinating. The broad length of different arms used, the multiplicity of arms who were used. The problem in the Civil War is neither side's ready for a conflict. So it's a desperate effort to gather arms and use them. So you have a weird combination. Everything from Brazilian Enfields to German Dresdens. Not Dresden, sorry. I get the actual term, but German four-banders.
I imagine arms manufacturers are trying to cash in on this too.
Oh, for sure. But it just becomes a mess. By 1863, the Union stops importing guns. By 1863, between Springfield and her subcontractors, the Union can produce all of its firearms domestically. The Confederacy was importing arms right up to the end of the war. Okay. But very quickly, both sides began to determine which was superior. So Enfield, Springfields, German four-banders, those are grade 1 weapons, Mississippi rifles. And then it would go by grade to inferior. So they become very selective, but it becomes really complicated when you stop focusing on just muskets, but look at like breech loaders and repeaters. There's a very wide multiplicity of firearms.
Take a moment to explain the difference between what a breech loader is.
Sure. So this is a muzzle loader. This is a rifle. So the loading process is not very simple at all, but straightforward. Tear open a cartridge, pour it in, push in the ball, move the ramrod, ram the ball home, return the rammer. Hope no one shot at you at this point.
That's what I was fixing to say. The whole time you're getting shot at.
It's a Civil War. We'll take our time. Half cock, cap, ready to shoot. No problem. A breech loader is a little more efficient. There's one. There we are. So this is one of the more famous breech loaders of the war. This is called a Sharp's carbine. And the Sharps is pretty straightforward. Open up the back, insert a round, close, cap, fire. So if you look carefully down the bore, webcams don't tell me ever do something like this. If you'll notice, as I open up the back, you can see the hole. Now that might not seem very impressive, but you have to understand that this section here has to simultaneously be a movable part and create a sufficient gas lock necessary to not release an explosion. A moving breech lock. That would be difficult to achieve by today's standards. Hence the reason why many reproduction Sharps will still leave a trail of black powder on your wrist. Doing so in the 19th century is extraordinary.
You said something about taking off the arm. So these things have a powerful kick when fired?
Yeah, pretty reasonable. It fires a 52 caliber round, so it's fairly similar to a musket.
Obviously the Army's getting get up as close as each other. Skirmishers, and this might be a question you may not know off the top of your head. It's kind of probably, maybe an unfair question. Since obviously the guns were a lot more, you could hit targets at longer ranges in the Civil War. What was the lifespan of a skirmisher in the Civil War as opposed to, like, say, the Mexican War?
Between the two, I couldn't tell you. I don't think that statistic was really recorded. But skirmishing was not. most memoirs I've read, the soldiers had to do it. They usually note skirmishing was terrifying but not dangerous.
Really?
Yeah, because you feel alone. To quote, what's his name? I can't remember right now. His New Jersey boy. I'm reading his memoirs, and he explained when you're skirmishing, you feel alone. It's a horrifying feeling, but
Oh, I bet.
you're not in any real danger. And you have to remember, skirmishers are spaced out by, usually about 6 or so paces. They're taking cover and they're firing carefully, and they're only looking to tease. Once an engagement begins, unless otherwise ordered, they're falling back. It's actually quite a safe role. It's only
Oh, okay.
scary
See,
because you're not shoulder to shoulder, and that shoulder to shoulder contact is psychological support.
I thought I would have thought that the skirmishing would have been, your main, your main target that would be going after. That's that. But now after you explain it, distance, the rifles wasn't as accurate, taking cover. That seems like that would be much safer than being in a line
Perfectly safe, just bloody terrifying.
that deep. Okay, what else? And this probably has to do with the rifling of it too. I mean, the distance in these wars. I mean, how many actual with the rifle being or causing so much more or being so much accurate from so much more distance? How many off the top of your head, like serious bayonet charges that were involved? Because I read where there was very few bayonet people who died from the result of the bayonet as opposed to previous wars.
So bayonet wounds in the Civil War as a cause of death are less than 1%. It gets truly slippery because a bayonet wound is inherently fatal. So it's quite possible the number of bayonet wounds are simply not recorded as wounds. However, I think the general consensus has been by historians that it was easy to order a bayonet charge. It was hard to actually do one. And even at incredibly close distances, men would fire their rifles. There are so many accounts of men being within a handkerchief of each other, and they're still shooting their damn guns. And I think part of that comes down to them being civilian soldiers, and stabbing someone is just a bit too much. It's easier to shoot someone.
Okay. Oh, stabbing someone up close with a bat is more gruesome and more personal than as opposed to
and shooting them. Yeah.
So it was more of a, I guess, humane way for them to have, or psychological way of compassion. I guess.
Or even just disassociation. What would you rather do?
Yeah,
pull a trigger or put a blade in someone's stomach? I mean, Jesus.
Okay. That's a better way of describing it. Disassociation. Okay. Yeah.
And then the other factor is a lot of times how fights resolved in the Civil War was, they meet at about 150 yards and they start slapping away at each other and then slowly whittling each other down. And that's why casualties are so high. You have regiments engaging at 150 yards, and for about 2 hours, they're just blasting each other back and forth, not even in volleys, but independently shooting until one regiment realizes, holy crap, we just lost 30% of our guys. We should go. So unless they got extremely close, it wasn't so much of a slam bang boxing match so much as two sides whittling away at each other until one finally said, hold enough. There are exceptions, of course. The first Texas at Antietam or the first Minnesota at Gettysburg. But a lot of the time, it really does come down to just two sides whittling away at each other.
There was now that you mentioned that I read the other day. There was a company, and I don't know if you've heard this before or if it's true. A company at Gettysburg in Pickett's charge. I think it was actually, was it Pettigrew's division?
You're thinking of the North Carolinians, yeah, 100% casualties.
100% casualties. That was it. When I read that, I did not think it was true.
It was Pettigrew's, by the way.
Huh?
Pettigrew's division.
It was, and I was like, and
That was the 8th Division, but Heath was taking
how?
over.
And I just could not wrap my mind around how did I mean? That just seems like mathematically impossible. 100% casualties. I mean, everybody was either MIA. That just it's just amazing to me that happened. I mean, I found it just absolutely astonishing that a company.
It's horrifying, isn't it?
I mean, nobody. I mean, everybody came. Everybody was a casualty. I mean, I just my mind still can't wrap my mind around that.
Well, you got to remember, a company at this point in either side is not but about 30 people.
Yeah, right.
So all 30 of them are killed, captured, or wounded. Most of them are probably captured.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's horrifying. But when you think of it in the cold calculus, it begins to make sense. Wrong company, wrong place, wrong time.
So, I got a question for you. I don't know a lot of people. I've heard a lot of people ask this right here. In the Napoleonic Wars, using those rifles, and you could destroy an entire army in one day, one battle. What happened? Why couldn't that take place? I can think of a few instances where it came close during the Civil War, but nothing on a Napoleonic form.
Oh,
is it because the rifles?
It did though.
An entire army.
Yeah. See, this is an area where I disagree with a lot of conventional historians. What would you call the Battle of Third Petersburg?
Well, I don't think the entire army was destroyed.
Not immediately. It took about 8 days.
Right. Yeah. Okay. I see where you're
Not a
going.
lot of time.
I'm talking about, like, say, Napoleon at Leipzig.
Sure, but I'll give you this. The difference is Grant won, whereas Napoleon's days were numbered. At Third Petersburg, Grant breaks through, and then for the next 7 days, and it's only 7, Lee retreats and Grant pursues. What the difference between a decisive versus a climactic battle is the pursuit. That takes hours or days, maybe a week. But within that week, Lee's army is whittled down from 60,000 to 30,000, and by the time he fights Appomattox, only 8,000 are actually willing to fight.
Before you go back to that, I did want to point something to what you just said. I'm glad you actually said that 60,000 number, because I've heard people say there's a myth among some people thinking that Lee only had 25,000 when he first left Petersburg. I've read some contemporary accounts now that say that Lee had rounded up all nearby, which very few there were, naval personnel, the few Marines, the nearby home guard units, and when he left Petersburg, he could have had as high as 70,000 men.
He did bring in the home guard and the reserves under Ewell. 70,000 is a little high.
And when he got to, when you think that he lost half his men at Sailor's Creek, and you factor in the desertions that took place along the way, and he surrendered with roughly 25,000 men, it's possible he did have as high as 70,000 men.
I usually figure around 60, but yeah. You
Yeah,
gotta remember, those desertions are happening because of General Grant's pursuit. And a climactic battle is decisive victory followed by successive attacks. So I think the reason we can't find a climactic battle in the Civil War is because historians arbitrarily ignore the climactic battles that end the war. If Lee had not been pursued after Third Petersburg, the war would have gone on for months. But he was pursued and destroyed.
Yeah, if he would have got out there and without Sailor's Creek, and he's got 60,000 men, and he didn't have to wait at Amelia Courthouse.
And to be clear, it's not just Sailor's Creek. Sailor's Creek's the big one, but there's also High Bridge, Amelia Courthouse, Farmville. All of these moments matter.
Um, okay.
And of course,
So
the Battle of Appomattox.
Battle of Appomattox. All right. So let me go ahead and all right. The one that I can think of is, and I guess would be the best one that when I say, that Napoleonic stop battle is, had it not been for the Rock, the Rosecrans army, the remnants of it should have been destroyed.
Oh, Chickamauga.
Yes.
It's hard to say because have you read Stephen Woodworth wrote a beautiful article about this called "The Bull in the Woods." It's in the Chickamauga campaign series. It's worth a read. I think it's safe to say that Thomas saved the army of the Cumberland at that battle. I don't think anyone could say otherwise. But Longstreet also managed to sacrifice that chance. But I mean, like Chickamauga is an amazing battle because it just demonstrates how fundamentally this is all about luck and confusion. The Longstreet broke those lines out of luck, and then he lost the opportunity out of confusion.
They moved the corps out of the way, and Longstreet hit the center with his best troops, and he had General Hood.
Pure luck. Pure luck. General Wood was ordered to move his division.
When you have, leading an attack with General Hood, I mean.
And the only reason Hood's corps moved as a column was because Longstreet couldn't fit the troops in line of battle. And then hilariously, General Wood wanted to question the orders to move because he knew the movement was not necessary and it would create a hole, except a couple days earlier, Rosecrans had very unprofessionally chewed him out in front of his staff and his soldiers because he had followed Rosecrans's orders. But not
I interviewed last night told that exact same story too.
So Wood basically said, "Fuck it, I'm not going to question his orders. This move makes no sense, but I'm going to do it because I don't want that to happen again." And if he had just sent Rosecrans a message saying your order makes no sense, the victory might not have happened for the Confederates. But Rosecrans got what he deserved. If you cannot treat your subordinates professionally, they will let you down.
I got a question, just touch on something that I've said often times, that so many of commanders on both sides that have looked great, the best we've ever had, and some of the ones that looked god awful worst in history. Sometimes it was just a few minutes here and just simply blind luck that led them to, to pull off, these great tactical victories, that otherwise could have ended up in a complete annihilation of the army.
General Hooker stole the march on Lee. He cut him off from his supplies, and he forced Lee to attack. The only reason it didn't work was damn bad luck.
So what got you into muskets?
Sorry?
What got you into muskets? Reenactment or?
Lord, I have no idea. When I was a teenager, I was really into this stuff. I suppose it was either being into muskets or dating. And I don't know why I cared so much, but I was really interested in the War of 1812, which ironically is a subject that I find rather
whooped you British twice, as I recall.
Sorry? Oh,
whooped you British twice.
Candor is eccentric.
What do you say? We us Southerners, we like our men religious and a little bit mad. I suppose that's why women call him.
That line is actually not in the novel. I'm rereading the novel right now. I'm teaching a novel study on it next week, so I'm rereading it.
So you decided, because I remember we talked a while back, and you said you thought it was a little mature for them, and that's why.
No, this is a different group. I teach privately and publicly.
Okay.
This is an older group. Although I might still get that young lad the novel. I think he'll love it. But, I mean, 1812 is a mess, and it's a very stupid war. But to be frank, it's a very stupid war. But
first of all, before I cut you off, let me tell you this: in history, and for the most part, and people I know from all over the United States, we're not taught that war. Here's the only thing that we have to take of it: something about imprisonment sailors, some battle in the Great Lakes, DC getting burned, and the Battle of New Orleans. That's all we get.
Yeah.
That's it. And then so we claim victory, and then I really, if I asked, I don't know anything about the war. I mean, so I just never, got me. But anyway, I'm sure you said fascinated you got taught a lot about it in school.
Have me on some other time. I'll tell you about it. It's too complicated for this conversation.
Well, we don't want to get off because we're on that. But anyway, so you got involved in that. Well, what was it about? What did about the U.S. Civil War? That you fell in love with?
Well, I mostly blame this guy and his book.
I can't. I think I may have heard of that book.
Never heard of it myself, but
yeah, I just don't know if I've heard of it or not. I think maybe.
I was 16, and we were on a trip to Washington for school, and I was very much a Canadian nationalist at the time. Looking back, I think nationalism is a very immature thing everyone should grow out of. But at the time, I was very interested in the First World War and Canada's role in the First World War. But we were at Gettysburg, and I thought I may as well read. And I remember thinking this distinctly, and looking back, it is hilarious. I thought to myself, I ought to read one book about the American Civil War just so I know what happened. And I went to the front desk and I asked if they had any books in the Civil War. This was a Civil War themed store. So I asked this assuming they were going to say yes. And to my amazement, they said no. Looking around, this is a whole Civil War themed store. How do you not have a book on it? They only had 3. And I wanted a nonfiction history, and they said we don't have any. And so I looked at, there were 3 books, and I said, okay, well, which one is most historically accurate? And he pointed to this precise copy and said, that one is the most accurate. So I bought it for $8. And by the time the bus was pulling out of Gettysburg, I knew that I had to learn more about this. And that's been going on for about 14 years.
When I'd always loved it. And I knew that always loved the movie. And
it's a good movie. Better novel.
And my friend said, you gotta read the book. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, okay. And he bought it for me. And he gave me that book. And I started reading it. And I did not finish it that night until I finished it. I read the whole book that night. Then I read it again the second night. And I read it, I've read it probably 4 or 5 times now. And it's the most amazing book he's ever. So anything else you got for us on muskets, Chris? Or
you keep asking. We didn't really get to the Civil War yet, but
I tell you what, let's because we're almost an hour in. Let's save that and we'll do a second segment on it.
Oh, what the hell? Why not? We'll do round 2.
Okay. We'll set that up and thank you for coming on, Chris, and we'll get this done soon.